Hello, and welcome to today's demonstration. My name is Gustavo Cavazos, and I'm a sales engineer for NuWave Technologies. And today we're doing video number 2 of 3 of the installation and configuration of Prizm Gateway. In the first video, we showed how to download, obtain a trial license, configure, and start Prizm Gateway. In this video, we're going to show some basic configuration that you can do and do a walkthrough through the console interface so that you can get familiarized with all the options available. The third and last video will be some small testing that we can do over Prizm Gateway. So overall, we're going to add a service. I'm going to redirect a service using all the functionality that Prizm Gateway provides. In the first instance, we're going to go into Prizm Gateway and define the listener. All the clients access REST endpoints connects into a port on a listener. So once you have Prizm Gateway running, we can log in and work with the items listed here. As following the same format as that way server and client, we have our dashboard, which shows active processes running, which CPUs are they running on, what connections are going to request, and some installation information. And then you have the API gateway configuration, in which you can define your listener, service, routes, view the paths, view the defined plugins, add consumers, load balancers, certificate settings. And last are the console configuration, which you can define users, groups, and profiles. The habitual users are admin, which give you administrator privileges. You can add developers or can add any other series of users. You can also add different groups depending on how you want to add. You can add a QA group and add them to them. And then use those groups later for management functions. As you can see, once we did a change, we got an advisory here that there are undeployed configuration changes and that we should go to the dashboard and redeploy them from there. Just by going to the dashboard and select redeploy and process control. So the first item to add is a listener. We go into the listener, and right now we have no listeners configured for this gateway. So we define one. So we create Prizm listener 1. Listener 1, and we specify to listen on port 1918, which is an export up from the one I installed. Use the default TCP/IP address. I don't want to bind to any specific address. You can bind to any specific address if you have multi-homed network cards on your TCP/IP servers. And of course, define to use TLS and enable it. So we do a save. And this defines our first listener. You can have multiple listeners per gateway, depending on your configuration needs. Again, they are deployed changes, and you will go to dashboard and redeploy those changes. And this is how we get our listener up and running, configured. Next step would be to add a service. In this case, we have an existing service running on this URL. And we want to define a new port and then redirect that incoming traffic to that endpoint. So we create a service called Echo endpoint, Echo test. And we want it to be a direct connection to the host we mentioned. The default port, no prefix, and we can also modify and add timeouts in case we need to add them. And then we save. Again, we save, and now we declared our endpoint, which is going to be a direct connection to the existing endpoint service here. Again, we are noticed that there are undeployed configuration changes. So we can go and redeploy them, or in this case, just gonna wait and then go to look at the routes. You can define multiple routes per service. In this case, we're gonna add a route for this service. Okay, in this case, there's none. We're gonna create a new one. Oops. Add service, we're gonna say echo service, echo route, echo route. And we want the path to be used echo. So we see the route added here, and we can go and redeploy the changes depending on the needs right now. So we define this path. It's going to be also forwarded to the endpoint that we defined, but we can also add plugins as part of the routes that you define, and that provides flexibility on the manipulation you want to do on incoming requests. In this case, we could add a plugin and a sample. There's several types of plugin: connection count limiting, rate limiting. For example, we can set connection count limiting and limit count to 1 or to 5. So we can limit this to only 6 active connections. You can limit by IP or by route. In this case, we're going to save it by route. And again, there are undeployed configuration changes. You would go to your dashboard and redeploy the changes. Now, the last step is look at load balancers and other services that are consumers. Once you have defined routes and plugins, you can see them. The echo route, we defined it, the routes and plugins, and the connection count limiting. To see the get on this echo route, we just do a get on this request, and it says you have reached echo service at host demo. Your request with the following arguments was this. So this request on port 19018 got sent to this echo service demo NuWave tech on port 80. Last but not least is looking at consumers, in which you can define other functionality such as adding consumers for adding users for basic authentication options, for JSON web tokens, also as consumers for routes that you define, and that way they will get verified depending on the web tokens that you define, the JSON web token or the basic auths that you can do. And you can define load balancers, in which you can define POS auth. You can define several hosts as an example, and several hosts, adding hosts to this, and select the balancing method, connection, round robin, IP hash, and what upstream protocol do you want to use. You want to do weighing for balancing. You won't want to have more than another one. You can do all that. And adding those activities, you do the management and the basic management and administration of Prizm Gateway. The next step would be to do the last video, which is a demonstration of some of the plugins available for Prizm Gateway. Thank you very much.